Thanks, Barbara. I was, I think the fire peaked a bit too soon. I lit it a little early. So I'm kind of like, no, it should be more dramatic. So, yeah, I think, no, oh well. Uh, so, hello, everyone. So I find myself this evening in the unenviable position of following up on the stories from Varavandu, Pranyamai, and Jyotika. I was really blown away by all of their stories and was struck by the fact that to one degree or another, they are sort of professional or semi-professional or just natural wordsmiths. And I've just been very, very impressed. Varavandu is a journalist. He puts stories together for a living. Pranyamai was just absolutely in her element. Just seems to come so naturally. And Jyotika as well, is trained in theatre and really brought that to his storytelling and weaving a really wonderful story. So I feel a bit like there's an Irish comedian, what's his name, David Doherty, who often starts his performances with a song. He has all these little keyboards and he starts a song that's like, please lower your expectations. And I'm tempted, I'd be tempted to say that this evening, but I won't, because I'm going to be telling a story from the Buddhist tradition. So even if I don't do it justice, I think the story will actually speak for itself, and it's profoundly moving and profoundly inspiring, even if I mess it up. So I'm, in a relatively good position this evening in that sense. Yeah, and so while I'm not necessarily a storyteller, I do have my own thing to offer. It's going to be much more sort of conversational, if you haven't already guessed. And that's also just to allow me to make mistakes if necessary. It's conversational. And the whole point of these evenings is to approach the material in a different way, in a sort of, ideally a sort of non-rational approach, or at least non-overly conceptual, through a narrative form. And like stories and narratives allow us to easily digest quite big ideas or big concepts. Stories have the power to communicate big ideas or concepts without us feeling like we're absorbing or digesting these big ideas. At the moment in the men's community, we're going through a bit of a Ursula Le Guin phase, the Earthsea novels. And they're amazing novels. They're fantasy. They're kind of aimed at sort of young adults, but, appeal to adults as well, I swear. And what Ursula Le Guin does is she can imbue stories with these big concepts around the Taoist tradition, and Buddhist tradition, as well as Jungian theory, Jungian depth psychology. So, big conceptual things. And she can make it so easy and pleasurable to engage with these ideas, engage with these concepts, because they're communicated in the form of a story. So hopefully I can still do that this evening. And the Buddhist tradition actually utilizes a vast amount of stories. And they're usually full of symbolism and archetypes. And from the Mahayana onwards, the Mahayana being the second big phase of the Buddhist tradition, it's almost like a sort of sci-fi fantasy, or I think nowadays they call it speculative fiction par excellence. So it's not unusual to find concepts like infinite space, infinite world systems, Buddha lands where there are millions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, impossible feats of physics where time and space is bent. So you have all these sort of great magical fantasy kind of stories going on, full of symbolism and archetypes. But you also have stories like the one I'm going to talk about tonight, which is very different. It's called A Case of Dysentery. So this is from the Kuchi Vikara Fatu. I think hopefully I said that sort of right. It's from the Mahavagga, which is part of the Vinaya Pitaka. If you're into that kind of thing, you might be interested to know. So it's from the Pali Canon, basically, which is the earliest scriptures, the earliest of Buddhist scriptures that were preserved in the Pali language. And the Pali Canon is not without its magic. The Buddha will often perform miracles. You'll find gods and devas, which are beings, radiant beings made out of light. You'll find demons, nagas, which are serpentine kind of magical beings, but like dragons or something. However, the story I'm going to talk about this evening does not have any of these. And what is magical about it, about this story in particular, is its humanity. The Buddha in our story tonight is the Buddha of our own history. He's not archetypal. He's much more closer to home in a way, even though it was a long time ago. So you can feel closer to the Buddha and to the early Sangha. It's much more down to earth, or even realistic. And I think that makes it, in some ways, quite easy to connect with. So let me just set the scene a little bit. So it was about 2,500 years or more ago. It was a time called the Axial Age. So closer to home, we would have figures in Greece like Heraclitus and Pythagoras. In China, you'd have Confucius. But we're somewhere of North India. And this part of the world at the minute is full of trade. So it's doing quite well, economically speaking. There's a lot of trade along the Silk Route. And the other big thing that's happening is this new spiritual movement. Lots of people are going forth from the home life and becoming wandering ascetics, trying to find liberation, trying to find a way out of the suffering of the world. So we can imagine a couple of miles outside of the town, there's a settlement of the hottest new spiritual movement. The followers of the spiritual leader Gautama Buddha, whose teaching has been spreading like wildfire amongst the community of Shramaneras, of these wandering ascetics. And at that time, all the reputation would have been by word of mouth. So you can kind of imagine that there were all kinds of ideas going around about this mysterious new spiritual movement. And you think, the idea of Chinese whispers, of these things changing and becoming less true as time goes on. Well, I imagine Indian whispers are similar, but with a lot more exaggeration. So we have things being heard about this new spiritual leader, that he's a teacher of gods and men. He's a warrior prince. He's a tamer of nagas. He's a corrupter of young men, a murderer of women, as we heard earlier, foretold to be a great ruler, a bull of a man, he whose teaching is the way to the beyond. So you have all these unusual ideas going around of who is this man? And we know from our tradition that primarily he is the Buddha. And the Buddha is a title, the awakened one. And it is told in the Pali Canon that some people, for some people, it was enough just to hear the word Buddha, and men and women would go forth into the homeless life, just hearing this idea of the awakened one. And that was enough to inspire people. So let's get into the story proper. At the start of this sutta, what do we find this great man doing, this Buddha? So the exalted one and his attendant Ananda were doing their rounds of the lodgings of the community of bhikkhus. So you can imagine these beautiful woods on the outskirts of a town, all these robed followers walking into this town in the morning to collect alms, keeping their eyes a plough length ahead of them on the ground. You can imagine huge numbers of these followers meditating in total silence. The dwellings there were very basic, made out of reeds and clay. We heard earlier about the Ganda Kuti, which sounds very, very beautiful, but it was probably no more than some wattle and daub little hut. And here we find the Buddha and Ananda are doing their rounds. So why was this exalted man doing rounds? Doing rounds makes it sound like it's a very regular thing. It's not an occasional thing. They're doing it on an almost daily basis, perhaps. So why is he doing this? He's doing this because he has a personal interest in his followers. So he's not a distant and removed leader or founder of the spiritual movement. He's not aloof to the welfare of his followers. The Buddha was seen was seen by his followers. They knew him on a personal level. And when it comes to exemplification, it requires this personal interaction. It requires being seen in order to exemplify. And the Buddha was doing his rounds, meeting with people, taking personal interest in them for this reason. Then you might ask, why is the Buddha doing his rounds with Ananda, his assistant? Why did the Buddha even have an assistant? The tradition would say it was just a practical thing, that the Buddha just needed someone to make his arrangements, take care of his needs, massage his back, clean his clothes, so on, so on. And often would even just say, well, the Buddha has always had attendants. But I think there's more to this. The Buddha actually had many attendants throughout his life. And all of these could deal with the practicalities. You might know the story of Meghiya. So Meghiya was one of the attendants that didn't quite make the cut. He didn't have what it took to be a Buddha's attendant. The story goes very briefly that Meghiya was in the nearby town collecting alms. And as he was returning to the Buddha, to whom he was the attendant, he spotted this beautiful mango grove. And he thought, oh, that would be a really nice place to come back once I bring the food back to the Buddha. I'll come back here to this lovely mango grove and meditate. It will be really good for meditation here. So he goes back and he says that he, gives the Buddha his food, and he says, "Hey, I'm gonna go down to this mango grove. It looks really nice, and I think it would be a lovely place for me to meditate." And the Buddha was, "I'm not so sure, Meghiya, if that would be a good idea. I think it would be better for you to stay here with me." And Meghiya was like, "No. I think I need to go down to this mango grove. It's really nice." And the Buddha says, "No, I really do think it's best you stay with me." And for the third time, Meghiya again insists upon going to this mango grove. So the Buddha says, "Okay, look, I don't think there's any convincing you here. So you can go to the mango grove and see how that goes. So Meggie goes to the mango grove and he tries to meditate, and he has huge hindrances. He can't meditate because he is tormented by hindrances. And he goes back to the Buddha and tells the Buddha, and the Buddha gives him a teaching about what is about spiritual friendship and why spiritual friendship is so important in spiritual life. So Meggie, as I said, didn't quite make the cut, but Ananda did. And I think the difference here was the fact that Ananda could be a companion to the Buddha. So Ananda actually knew the Buddha since they were children. He was a cousin. And when the Buddha returned to the land where he came from, he reconnected with Ananda, and Ananda became his follower. And I might be incorrect here, but I think it was around 33 or maybe 35 years that Ananda was his personal assistant, something like that. But I'll stand corrected on that. We know what Ananda thought about the Buddha because from the Parinibbana Sutta, we know we have a quote about what the Ananda thought of him. So I'll just read that out. Venerable Ananda entered a dwelling and stood there leaning against a door jamb and crying, "Oh, I'm still only a trainee with work left to do, and my teacher about to become fully extinguished, he who is so kind to me." So this is the Buddha about to die. Ananda is distressed that he's not yet fully enlightened. And he leans against the door and he says, lamenting that he's going to lose the Buddha, he who is so kind. So not he who is so wise, he who is so intelligent, so funny, but he who is so kind. So that seems to be the main emphasis of their companionship, the main aspect of their relationship. We also know what the Buddha's impression of Ananda was. Another quote. For many a long day, Ananda, the Tathagata has been waited on by you with kindly body service, with kindly service of speech, with kindly service of thought that is profitable, ease-giving, undivided and unstinted. So obviously this was a companionship of mutual kindness. The fact that Ananda was not enlightened does not seem to come into the picture. Sometimes it's, I don't know, it's almost like I would imagine all the enlightened bhikkhus coming together, and once you're all just enlightened together, it's kind of, oh God, yeah, what about all those unenlightened people, you know? Oh God, it's good to get a break from them. It's those muggles, you know. But obviously that's not the case. There's something about the enlightenment experience that's just simply not one-sided. It's not a one-sided experience. Communication and companionship seems to be an inherent part of it. And this is exemplified in the relationship between the Buddha and Ananda. So two friends or companions, they're doing their rounds, they're taking personal interest in the lives of their brothers and sisters in the Dharma, and they come to one of the lodgings. And there's a bhikkhu, and he's found lying on the ground in his own excrement. It doesn't say this, but I get the impression that he's old and frail, and that he's a sorry sight indeed, and certainly not what you'd expect to see in the spiritual community of bhikkhus. So the Buddha asks him, what is wrong? And he replies, I have dysentery, Lord. The Buddha asks, why isn't anyone helping you? Oh, and he answers, there is no one to help me, Lord. The Buddha would ask, why aren't the other bhikkhus helping you? And he answers, I am useless to the brethren, Lord. Therefore, the brethren do not care for me. So I was thinking, what would I do in that situation? I'd probably, if I was the leader of this group, I'd probably storm into the meditation space and go, get off your bleeding, meditation cushions and get in there and help this man. He's helpless on the ground. All this teaching about metta and love and all that, and none of you are doing anything about this. That's how I would do it, probably. A really strong desire to reprimand people for not listening to what I'm teaching, for not thinking about this ill man. But what does the Buddha do? The Buddha and Ananda fetch water. They clean the ill monk. They take him by the feet and the head, and they lift him off the ground into the bed. And only when they are sure that this ill monk is comfortable and clean, the Buddha then calls an assembly. And even then, he doesn't jump to any assumptions. Again, it would be very tempting just to start giving out to people. But instead, he asks the assembly what had happened. Were they aware of this ill monk? And the assembly confirms, yes, we are aware there's a monk with dysentery. And they confirm that they didn't help the monk because he doesn't contribute very much. So they didn't feel he deserved to be helped. Sometimes I personally imagine that this sick monk might have been a bit cantankerous, might have been a cantankerous character, because it kind of helps me to think about it in relation to my own life. I'm not going to be in a position where I'm going to be leaving people on the ground like that in their own filth and with who are very ill. But I do have people that could be a bit contrary, that I find contrary. And I have to think about my own sort of response to that sometimes. So the Buddha, once he confirmed the facts, then gives a teaching rather than resorting to harsh words. He says, monks, you have no mother, you have no father. Who might tend to you? If you don't tend to one another, who will tend to you? Whoever would tend to me should tend to the sick. So this exaltation has so much power and heft by the very virtue of the fact that the Buddha has exemplified it already. His response to the sick monk with Ananda has already exemplified what he has exalted. His and Ananda's actions are totally congruent with what he is teaching. We can usually say they talk the talk, but can they walk the walk? The Buddha walks the walk even before he talks the talk. His imploring his followers to tend to one another is also exemplified in his companionship with Ananda. This story, being part of the Vinaya or monastic code, is quite interesting because the code of conduct is exemplified through a concrete example, communicating not just the rules, but the context from which these rules sprang up. So I kind of like to think of this Samgrahavastus of exemplification as the creating of a particular culture within a community. I also like to sort of think of a lineage of culture that goes all the way down to us today in Triratna. For example, this whole walking in twos sort of thing, we have this image of the Buddha and Ananda walking together around India. And if you go to, some people here may not have had the opportunity to be in-person retreats yet, but you'll often see people heading off in pairs and twos, and it's just sort of a cultural thing that's just sort of come down. And yeah, I just sort of wonder how conscious that was in terms of Sangharakshita kind of creating that sort of culture. The other piece, more important piece of culture that I think has passed down through that lineage is the personal interest. And this is something I've noticed myself when coming in contact with Triratna. So the first ever retreat I was on, I remember myself and Yanadara talked about this recently, because Yanadara was on that retreat, and I was totally green. It's my first ever retreat, and I was sitting down at the table, and Yanadara struck up a conversation with me, and it was all very pleasant. And then he asked me if I was interested in going for a walk, and I was a bit like, oh, okay, sure. I don't know what that's all about. It's a bit odd, just the two of us, okay. And you know, all sorts of things are going through my head. It's like, is this where I'm going to be attempted to be indoctrinated into a cult? Am I, you know, going to be reprimanded for coming on a retreat too early? Am I going to be told, I don't know, is he hitting on me? I don't know. I don't know. You know, I found it all very, very odd. And Yanadara confirmed that I was a closed book on that walk. And hopefully he knows now why I was so closed. I wasn't quite sure what was going on there. Hopefully I've forewarned everyone now. So if someone asks you to go for a walk in twos, that's what's going on. It's and but I was very appreciative of that. I'm just not used to someone taking that degree of personal interest in me. And it happened again then. I found that retreat quite difficult. And I said, oh, I don't think I'm going to go on another retreat. I don't think that's, maybe retreating, I'll be a Buddhist who doesn't go on a retreat, because it was so tough. And then Vajrashura came up to me one day in the center and just said, we're running a summer retreat. I think it'll be really good for you. Don't worry about the money. You should go on it. Just pay a little bit towards food. And I was like, okay. and I was like, wait, I thought I was never going to go on a retreat again. But somehow that sort of personal engagement, that personal interest just sparked something in me. And I went on that week retreat and I loved it. It was totally different from the first retreat. And again, I knew then about the couples walks, and it was great. And soon I was living in a community. I was asked to live in a community. And that's where companionship started happening, companions in the Dharma life. And I think ordination and becoming a mitra also. So we talk about these steps in the spiritual life, or initiations of sorts, as being witnessing of someone's going for refuge. But it's also an opening up and being seen. And yeah, so it's I think exemplification is all part of that as well. And I'm noticing now that I'm personally interested in people, particularly those who are getting engaged, who are becoming mitras, asking for ordination, training for ordination. I'm personally interested in them in the same way people were personally interested in me. So I'm just finishing up now. I know I've gone over time, so apologies. So the magic of Sangha is how a lineage of culture created by the Buddha over 2,500 years ago, through his exemplification of companionship and a spontaneous response to a brother in need, informs how I live my life as a Buddhist today. So I stand corrected when I say that this story doesn't quite have the same sort of magic. It's just that this simple and down-to-earth tale has magic in it after all. So that's it from me. Thank you.